It's a great pleasure for me to be here and talk about the rights-based approach. And I'm particularly happy and very pleased that my colleagues Brian and Mihir have initiated this work, and they worked with me as my assistants as the UN Special Rapporteur. But I've now gone beyond the health, unfortunately, and I'm a bit busy with other things. But this is an area which is very close to my heart. And what I want to do is actually very quickly go through things that I think most of you know, and then look into the rights-based approach. Let me just at the outset say that the rights-based approach in India has been implemented, and it has been very successfully implemented in the HIV scenario. I think we have to learn lessons from that, and I was intimately and closely involved with the HIV issue right from 1988 till now. And I think some of the lessons from HIV are important. And I think, and let me be very candid, despite my great respect for the earlier speaker, and with due respect to him, as we say in court, I think we have failed in TB. And one of the primary reasons, I think, well, there are two. One is that the government is not the provider of TB treatment in India. It's the private sector, which is a big challenge. And secondly, the rights-based approach is not at all used in TB. And unless we actually go there, I don't think we'll actually really solve the problem. Just very, very quickly look into the numbers. I think most of you know the numbers, so I'm not going to get into the details of it. But very important, India has a huge percentage of the burden. That's the takeaway point. Numbers you know, and it's one of the leading causes of mortality in India now. I mean, these slides are available, so you can just, I don't believe in copyright, though I'm an IPR lawyer. So please copy and violate copyright. That's the only way you do it. India has again a huge burden of TB, MDR. Numbers are very high. We have the largest numbers, and most importantly, I think it's important to appreciate that their numbers are not actually detected. This is very important. Why is that we are not able to detect the numbers? Why is it that the lines and the crevices where people are actually afflicted with the ailment, I don't like to call it disease. In HIV we learn the language that if you want to empower people, you have to think about not disease that you're ill, but you're living with it, and you can actually battle it out. So language also becomes important. You're not a victim, you're just a person who's afflicted with an ailment. So language in empowerment is also very important. But why are we not able to do it? Because we are not able to trace people who are, I'm not talking about tracing now in the epidemiological sense, but we don't have proper relationships through counseling with people who can actually get us to the people who really need the treatment. So people, I don't know how many of you have been in India in the last 1 month. There are still advertisements on HIV. A lot of advertisements, but they are actually scaling down. At one time we had huge number of advertisements. But how many people know that TB is curable from advertisements on the radio, television? There are hardly any. Where is the very aggressive campaign to say there is nothing wrong if you are TB positive, we can treat you. Please come for help. This is how we can do it. There is none. So if I'm TB positive, in fact one of my colleagues in my Bombay office, she fell ill and she had TB. And recently she had MDR TB. So fortunately, because she knows me and my office, we are very helpful. And there was a problem. She had a problem of eating also. But she had access to information. But she told me there are so many people who just don't know what to do. So the main problem is to actually get people to know that, look, you could be living with TB. This is the issue. you can be treated. This is the issue. And I don't agree with the earlier speaker that you have to do it without getting informed consent. In my opinion, if you do not treat people with respect and dignity, you will never actually solve the problems. I'm very emphatic about it, and we can debate it for a very long time. I'm saying with living experience, if I may use that phrase. I have seen people who say, I don't want to do it, and if you talk to them with respect, and in our culture, let me say it very candidly again, we just did not respect people. We are people who believe in discrimination. I'm saying this, I'm an Indian. Our society and all societies are afflicted with inequality. Look at the US. I used to think Obama is a big epitome of race relations being solved. It is not the case. Same thing in India. It's not peculiar to India. And we have multiple problems because of the old historical reason. We have a very good constitutional framework, Nehruvian. Now, Nehruvian is not very fashionable, But it's important to realize what he did. And one of the most important things was about equality. And because we don't have that, we don't treat people with respect. Let us look at our own self. I'm telling you, if you don't change yourself, you will never change the world. And this is a war we have to wage. You have to realize that if you want to work in TB, you have to respect people with dignity. And I want to ask every one of us, do we treat our own family members with dignity? Whether it's a woman or a child or a servant in your house. If you don't, you have no business to be in that field as a doctor, because you cannot change. A person who is actually treated with respect will come forward and listen to your advice. If not, that is why people don't go to the government centers. They are not treated with respect. That's the major problem. And if you are from a lower caste, then forget it. I just want to say this. It's not an issue. In HIV we learned, it's not the issue of disease. It's an issue of discrimination and stigma. And stigma is compounded if you are of a particular group, ethnic group, caste group, whatever you want to call it. It's just compounded. Or you are not from Bombay or Delhi or whatever it is. Tumi Mumbaicha manus nahi hai, if you understand Marathi. That's it. Okay, so it is nothing to do with technical issues. This is what we learned from HIV. Today, the people who are most educated on ARVs in the HIV people are the HIV people, not the doctors. They know more about HIV treatment than any doctor. Because we have empowered them, we spent time with them. I'm saying this, departing from my slides, I want this to be brought home to people. Don't talk about these issues. I'm deliberately provoking people. Because if I don't provoke, we will lose the battle yet again. Because we have succeeded in HIV. We can be confident. So, huge burden. We have the directly observed treatment. Learned previous speaker mentioned about it. Then we have the revised National Tuberculosis Control Program. Very good programs, but not involving the community. If you don't involve people, are there any patients group on TB who can come up like HIV? We had a protest morcha on Wednesday of HIV positive people against the US pressure on intellectual property rights. Why did we do it? I didn't do it. I wrote an article about it because the US wants their laws to be copied by us. Very good for them, very good for their business, very good for our businessmen, but useless for our people. Who is protesting about it? The HIV positive people. Why are they protesting about it? Because they know what patents mean. Because we spent 5 years talking to them and educating them about it. In fact, I remember in 2001 we started the program. 2002 we thought, oh, nobody is interested in it. And in 2003, Loon Gangtek came and told me, Anand, start the program again. People thought it's all useless. Why should HIV positive people know about intellectual property rights? Patents, how is it relevant to them? That is the attitude people have. It is vitally important for their very life. The whole notion we have experts only should know about it. No. The people who are most affected by it, they will only fight against it, not you and me. Because we are very comfortable. How much money do I own? I can afford a drug. But not those people. So they will be on the streets, and they were on the streets on Wednesday, protesting about that. Despite the fact that the new government doesn't like protests and doesn't like criticism. But they will have. You can't get out of it. This is a country which has freedom of speech. It's constitutionally guaranteed. If you don't agree with it, you have a right to speak. You have the right to protest. And that will be exercised depending on whoever opposes you. What I'm trying to say is, the reason we have to understand this is that we must involve the community. Okay, first line, okay, one of the major problems, drug discovery, TB. We have first line, we have second line. Second lines are very expensive, but where is the research in TB? Now it's become an important issue. There are new drugs coming in. Will we get them? A lot of them are being patented. In fact, we are first going to file an opposition against one of the drugs. I just want to tell you, you know the drugs, the costs are very heavy. Okay, one of the problems is diagnosis is a very big issue. And one of the ways of looking at it is, oh, you didn't create the demand. How do you create the demand? Our view is, my view is, that you must empower people. That creates the demand. It's there are stockouts now in HIV. There is a demand. Why is there a stockout? Because of a failure of a system, which is a general system of how you procure and all that. But who's talking about these issues? You know, I talked to now it's called the Department of AIDS Control, not NACO. I said, look, this is a very big issue, and I believe that we must discuss and dialogue with everybody, including the government. And the previous directors of NACO had a view that if you disagree, then you can go to court. So I would tell them, I would actually tell Mr. Prasada Rao, Mr. Sujata Rao, all those people, now we have come to this end and we cannot do anything, we have to go to court. They would say, okay, now we are right, you can go to court. That is the meaning of public interest litigation. When you fail to resolve an issue amicably, you go to court and sort it out there. Now there is a major problem of stockouts on all issues because of a systemic issue. But the government doesn't want to acknowledge it, that it's an issue. So I talked to Dr. Iwari only day before yesterday that in Chhattisgarh there is a huge problem of pediatric doses not being available. Because he told me very clearly, and rightly so, that if you have a problem, ring me up. And he is available on the line. You know, he is available for anybody to talk to him. But they didn't get the drugs. And there's a problem going on. But who's demanding it? There's a system for HIV positive people to do it. Where is it in TB? If a person in TB doesn't get the drugs, he or she doesn't even know what to do because they're not empowered. First line is not available, diagnoses are improper, nobody knows. Okay, I've gone on to that too much. This is the issue of awareness and community, but in TB, like HIV, more so in TB, nutrition is a very big problem. A lot of the people who are living with TB for a short time or a long time, and if you have MDR, etc., then nutrition is a very big problem. And we have to have a holistic view of it and how to deal with it. And thirdly, I think as people realize how to take up the challenge of the private sector, because 80% of the people are actually going to the private sector. Because the government sector has not been able to sell itself. I personally think that government sector should provide the majority of the services, but if it's not possible, how do we actually bring in the private sector? That's a very big challenge. But that's not only on the right to health. Now, bedaquiline is one of the drugs. I think there are a number of patent applications. We are filing opposition to that because you can file, I don't know if you know about patents, but patents are filed on a number of applications. The real drug which is useful is more easier to demolish in a patent opposition than the base. The base is not the one which is actually used. So there are a number of applications filed. If they are patent, there will be a major problem. If they are not patented, of course, there's an advantage. But the other thing is, even though they are patented, certain companies are not registering them. Now, if that happens, you can get a compulsory license issued. But let me tell you very frankly, the government not only this government, even the previous government, with the pressure that is being brought about by the US and Japan, and now Japan and the EU on intellectual property rights issues, compulsory licenses are not going to be easily granted. Because it's seen as a violation of intellectual property, which it actually is not, because it's very much part of the system. The US actually issues what are called compulsory licenses in India all the time. Nothing new about it. But a major issue is about patents. In fact, my view is that the government should look into this, and if government thinks that patents should not be granted for other reasons, they should help in opposition to those patents. So this is another issue. Now let me come to the right to health, which is my main topic. Okay, the right to health has been enunciated in international covenants. The main one is the Economic Social Rights Covenant, and it has various elements. I'm going to very quickly go through them. The first element of it is the availability, accessibility, and acceptability of health services, goods, and facilities. Medicines are inclusive in that, and they should be of good quality. So they must be available and they must be accessible. Now, they are being made available in India, but people do not know that they are actually available. That's a major problem. Okay, it also has freedoms and entitlements. So autonomy is recognized in this. Autonomy of a person. So when you actually deliver services, like you must take DOTS treatment, you do it by informed consent. And if you want to have informed consent, you must actually inculcate within that person who is actually possibly living with TB, that you should go for diagnosis, you should go for a test, and you can have this treatment. And if you actually proactively do that, you can get everybody to give consent. Okay? Then the obligations on the state are to respect, protect, and fulfill the right to health. Respect is that it itself should not violate it. For example, medicines are not available. Therefore, it is not respecting it. To protect, for example, the private sector may violate the right, so the state will actually prevent that interference on the right to health and must take administrative measures by fulfilling the right to health. One of the most important elements of the right to health approach is the participation of those affected. It's part of the right to health framework. It's not Mr. Grover saying it. It is part of the right to health framework. Because the best way to design a program, to actually implement it, monitor it, and have it accounted is to have participation in individuals. This is a very important facet. Don't take only this. I was in Japan for the Fukushima disaster report. One of the major problems there was they don't believe in this because they have a different attitude to participation. They said, what are you talking about participation of individuals? We have elected representatives. They are the people who are actually representing the people. They are participating in everything. Why do you need other people? I asked them only a simple question. When the disaster, tsunami followed by the nuclear disaster took place, what happened to the persons with disabilities? They were not involved in the program at all. So they were put in houses, and they have a huge program for persons living with disabilities. They provided them houses without any services. So no ramps, no bars to hold their hands. It was completely useless because the people who had designed those houses and the people who implemented the program were not people living with disabilities. And this is a country where the money is not an issue because the participation didn't exist. And they realized this. This notion of participation is thought of by people, it's interfering with government. We had the same attitude here. In fact, I remember when we had filed a petition in the Supreme Court, after informing NACO at that time, that we are filing a petition for second ARV line. Dr. Rivari was a person in charge, and the court said you should settle it. So we said, okay, let's sit together, and that's the only way to do it. Negotiate, dialogue, and settle it. So I took with me in the meeting number of HIV positive people's representatives. So Dr. Rivari said, why are you bringing these people here? I said, but they are the most affected people, they have to be here. Initially he was reluctant, but later on he realized the value of that. Today he realizes on them to get intelligence of whether drugs are being delivered or not. Because the bureaucracy is not really interested. If you go to the rural areas, some of them are not even there at the centers. The bureaucracy works in its own way. It's based on paper. Paper is the most important for them. Record is the most important to them. There are passionate people within the bureaucracy, but not all of them are so passionate. Same thing is happening to NGOs also, 9 to 5 job. I'll give you another example. On Monday I'm doing a death penalty case. One of the major issues is delay. The Gavit sisters in Bombay, they have been meted out with don't call it awarded death penalty because it's not an award. You are meted out a death penalty. So you are entitled to have commutation if there is delay. There is delay of 8 years in their case. So Supreme Court has held recently that it can be delayed. If there is delay, then you can get it commuted. In this case, you will be amazed to know the delay. They filed first mercy petition. For a year, the state government is asking for English copy of the judgment when it's all in English, 3 copies of it, then photocopies of it, that takes 1 year. They file another mercy petition because they are in jail, so the jailer files another petition. The whole thing repeats again. This is 6 years. This is how the bureaucracy works. What are you going to do about it? So you have to have a system which actually energizes the bureaucracy. That is a challenge before the present Prime Minister. He has his own ways of doing it. You may agree or disagree, but this is a challenge. At the middle and lower echelons of the bureaucracy, the system is not good today. I'll give you another example. We went for the HIV bill. We drafted the HIV bill. A lot of effort, everybody, NACO, everybody. NACO agreed to the draft. Went to the Law Ministry. Law Ministry, I'm sorry to say, and this is the opinion of all the Attorney General, Solicitor Generals, unlike the other ministries where you have IAS, very highly educated, competent people, the Law Ministry doesn't require that. A person who's just passed law can be in the Law Ministry. They have no idea about, say, international covenant. I thought I'll go and spend a day and try to convince that these are the right things. I had to spend 3 days, and I will tell you what happened. It's a shocking state of affairs. We went at 10:30, person is not on the table. We waited till 11:30. I don't know whether this continues now. That at least has been remedied by the present Prime Minister's new this thing. 11:30, first thing is, would you like to have tea? Then 12 o'clock, I think we have finished. No, nothing is discussed from 11:30 to 12:30. 12, another cup of tea. This is the Law Ministry. I am not talking about any other ministries. It's a peculiar thing. Because the people there are just pushing paper. But let me tell you, this is nothing to do with other ministries. So please don't get that wrong. So Law Ministry is special. And everybody in other ministries says, "Arey, abhi Law Ministry mein paper jayega to kya karenge?" This is how it is. But if you want it done fast, you can get it done fast. So what I'm trying to say is the bureaucracy is actually, there's a problem, especially in the social sector. If it's corporate things, no problem. You want a license? Now, I won't go into all the other issues. It's very quick. Quick meaning you have to finish all those 50, 60 forms and all that. But probably next generation. There's an argument going on in the court, in the Supreme Court on the 2G case. Well, ministers were meeting the corporate honchos, Why should they not meet? They want more spectrum. Can the TB person say that, and I want more medicines, I should be able to meet every day? No. Because you are not a person of import. That's the problem in our country. I'm deliberately provoking you, please, so don't. So one of the things I said is participation. If I don't provoke you, then I will not do my duty, okay? In the right to health framework, there are certain facets which are progressively realizable. Suppose there are, a lack of people who require TB treatment, and you just got the new drug. You can't roll it out to those people in one day. So you'll roll it out progressively. But there are certain elements which are non-derogable and immediately, like a plan. Do we have a plan? So that is not derogable and it's a core obligation. One of the most important part of the core obligation that it should be without any discrimination. The rollout of services, goods and facilities. And that I think we can be proud of in India. We don't have that problem. But it plays out at the local level, which I've talked about. Issues of marginalized groups are important. We were able to deal with that in HIV. Partly because it's a separate program, and that's a challenge when you move into the mainstream. Because, say, ASHA worker, he or she doesn't know whether transgenders are an important group within the HIV. So how are they going to deal with it? Or a person living who's a man having sex with men, homosexuals. After the Supreme Court judgment, it's not a very happy state of affairs, but the vulnerable groups are very important. So the vulnerable groups have to be also specially catered for, and that is a problem. It's not discrimination in a way, but it's actually catering for the vulnerable groups, which is very, very important. Now, there's a lot of issue, the previous speaker said about the money available. Now, in international law, I don't think we have a problem about money in TB, but anyway, if there is an issue, how does the law deal with it at the international level? What are your available resources? Are you making full use of your available resources and making every effort? That the government must be able to satisfy the conscience of the community, and if it goes to court. And you must be able to use your available resources to the maximum. That's a slightly sensitive issue, because what is available? If you spend X amount of money on armaments, can you use that in the whole budget? And say, no, you should not be using it. What about the threats we have from Pakistan, China, etc.? So those issues are, but there is a way of dealing with that. If you want to go into that and read more about it, you can go into the last report I did for the UN General Assembly on this issue. I don't want to deal too much with this. Okay. In India, there is the right to health, which has been read into Article 21. So if people, as far as medicines are concerned, which are necessary for life itself, like essential medicines, they have been treated as part of the right to health in India. So if medicines are not available, you can go to court and actually make sure that you get those medicines. But more importantly, the issues which are also part of the right to health framework, which I'm going to quickly deal with it. What is the meaning of autonomy and bodily integrity? When you talk about a person being respected and treated with dignity, what do you mean? So there are most important fundamental human right is autonomy of an individual, the most important. So if a person's bodily integrity or autonomy is interfered with, that's a violation. Now, in the Nalsar judgment on transgender, Justice Sikri has gone into very great detail about autonomy. If you have a chance, please read it. But in law, it is recognized to be so. So, the Contract Act, Criminal Law, Constitution, all of them are premised on the person having autonomy. Even if you have a contract, you have to have a contract at arm's length. A person who is not actually an equal to enter into a contract will not be treated. The result of that would be that the contract may be set aside because of other reasons. The Indian Penal Code or all penal codes will say that you cannot, at normal common law as it were, touch a person without his consent. So statutory law has to override it. So in order to effect arrest, the police has the right to touch you and take into custody. you may be TB positive, you should do this, you should get tested, you should have diagnosis, these are the treatments available, etc. That is part of informed consent to testing. But in HIV, we realized that this was a major problem because that in terms of cost, it can be very heavy. So you have peer educators who do that. You can have different systems. But in my opinion, the counseling component of the program is very, very, very important. That's where you actually empower people by information. In my view, if you actually give proper information with due respect and dignity accorded to the person, there is 99.9% cases who will say, of course I want to be tested. I want treatment. I have not come across any HIV positive person saying, I don't want to be tested. Because treatment is available. It was when treatment was not available at all and it was a death sentence that was the issue. Now, in India, we have recognized that informed consent is very important for treatment. Not for testing, there is no special kind of judgment. But for treatment, 100%, the Supreme Court has said that you have to give the basic information about risks, benefits, and alternatives. You must give that for treatment. So that is Samira Kohli's case. I have not mentioned it, but if you want, we can send you that. Then there is the issue of privacy and confidentiality. So privacy is recognized in Article 21. That's not an important thing because when you go to the doctor, you actually are not, you are in a private situation, which is really the notion of confidentiality. So if the nature of the relationship is such, doctor-patient, and the information is such, which requires the obligation of confidence to be maintained, then it has to be maintained. But in the setting, except for HIV, how many doctors actually bother to keep things confidential within the healthcare setting? That's a major issue. The Code of Medical Ethics also talks about it. And you can actually breach confidentiality on a number of grounds. I'm not going into that. Then, in India, we have the notion of non-discrimination, which is prevalent all over the world, not only at international law, but otherwise also. But the discrimination issue is only relevant for state actors in India. It is not an obligation imported from private actors at all. Unlike the US, where there are specific anti-discrimination laws, and in England, where there are specific anti-discrimination. In fact, our HIV bill talks about that. So it's also an obligation of the private sector. How much time? 5 minutes? 0. Okay, I'll quickly. I'm sorry, I'd have a bad habit of talking too much. So I'm going to talk about one very important issue and stop here. In TB, unlike HIV, there is obviously a significant risk of transmission if you're active sputum positive. So what is the law? In law, you will follow the non-discrimination principle and the principle of what is known as the least restrictive alternative. You don't suddenly say, okay, you are HIV, you are TB positive, and you are actually posing a significant risk, therefore we'll isolate you. No. You look at other options first. You first talk to the person. The person should agree. At the last resort, maybe, if the person is deliberately seeking to transmit, then you may isolate the person. Because now we know that there are cases, there are studies done in Southern Africa that for TB positive people, you don't have to have closed hospital settings. In fact, that is the worst. You need open community centers with ventilation. Stay within the community. Use precautionary measures like, handkerchief when you cough, etc., etc. So how do you do that unless you educate and empower people? It's not easy. When I cough, do I put my hand? A lot of times you just cough. So for persons who are actively TB positive, they have to be educated and empowered. That look, you can be in the community, you can be in a setting which is a community, you can meet your friends, your family in an open ventilated environment, but you must take these precautions so that you don't transmit the active agent to the other person. Use the hand, handkerchief when you cough. It's a habit you have to get into. So that requires empowerment, changing the person's mindset. How do you do it? If you just give medicines, it's not going to change. You need counseling, you need empowerment of people. So therefore, again, this thing. So the principles are there on the least restrictive alternative. You only do it to pursue, it's here. So I don't want to take too much time on that. If we have time, we can. Only about employment, because treatment means that you don't have to be isolated. But in HIV, we had a very good judgment of the Bombay High Court. Basically, if you are qualified, and this is for recruitment of HIV positive people, which is denied, but in the state sector. If you're actually qualified for the job, suppose it's a doctor or a surgeon, you need the qualification. You're functionally fit for the job, and you don't pose a risk of transmission, a significant risk, you can actually be recruited. But what about TB? Because you would be posing a risk at a particular time, but only for a short period of time until you are treated. So again, so you use that. So I'm going to stop here because I think I made the nutrition is a very big issue. There are remedies, you can go to court, but I don't want to talk about the court remedies. In the HIV bill, we have what is called a health ombudsperson. What I want to impress is that's an experiment for HIV. In districts, we have a person who will actually be a person for remedying grievances by passing orders. It's like a Lokpal, but for the health sector. That's what I would like, developed even for TB. So if it works for HIV in the HIV bill and the HIV law, if it is ever passed, it can be replicated along all the health sector. Because why should you go to court to get an order? There should be a person within the government who you can just write to. I am a woman pregnant with HIV or any other ailment or Hep C, and the doctors are refusing to deliver my baby. This is a major complaint. So immediately that person will pass an order. That is the way to go without any acrimony, and if necessary pass an order, and that can work. But there are other methods which are the regular legal routes. I don't want to dwell on that because that will take a bit of time and I'm running out of time. Thank you very much.